It was a very sad day today for India. And in fact, it has been sad for a while, since March, third week of March, and things are getting bad to worse. The whole day was a downer. It was a depressing day, a very sad day, and each day is a photocopy, Xerox of the last day, because things are not appearing to get better. Anyway, so in order to do something constructive and push all those sentiments of anxiety, fear aside, it's always better to go towards clarity. That's exactly what I have tried to do. um, it hardly feels right to speak about anything else than what's happening, but at the same time, what's right is to divert our attention to something that's more concrete, because at some point in time in future or the other, the pandemic is going to end and India is going to uh, handle the situation with flying colors. This is what I believe. I'm confident about it. Alright, so in my last video, I was more perplexed than anything else about how come the public debt in our country is so much and still nothing seems to happen on ground. There seems to be very little social expenditure, welfare programs compared to some Nordic countries, that's northern countries of Europe, and with a couple of other countries like Canada. Um, all these countries seem to have managed their uh, social welfare funds in a much better way. So it was something that was riding on my mind. So I thought of exploring deeper, and at the same time, I noticed a certain uh, anomaly, a certain it wasn't adding up. The the statements that, or the impression that usually governments of all nations give, but since I can only speak for my country, the impression that we get from anyone who's in authority, anyone who's running the government, forget about the parties, because in my research, in my findings, what I went through, the text that I went through, it was not party specific. Everyone seems to be going the same way. They don't want to give any share to private sector, as they say, and there are few examples that I have taken up until I could narrow down on what must be happening. All right, so let me start with example number one, that's aviation industry. I've written certain points like always. I am starting with Jet Airways. Now we know that Jet Airways stopped working. It stopped, its last flight was in 2019. And the reasons, as we know, is there was too much debt on them. Their lenders were just not ready to give them any moratorium that they needed so much, and they were incurring huge losses because there was concrete economic reasons. Oil prices had shot up, which had increased their cost, and rupee had fallen down. There was, as a result, they were, when a flight operates internationally, they don't get as much money as they require when their own currency falls down, because they have to deal in their currency. So after facing a lot of problems, after asking for some time moratorium, after trying to arrange for more debts from other banks, nothing seemed to work out for Jet Airways, which was a private airline. It shut its shop. Then we come to, this happened in 2018-19. Then we come to Kingfisher. Now what happened with Kingfisher? If Indians would know, it happened in 2012. Now these people, just like Jet Airways, also had a lot of debt to deal with. And they had high fixed assets because they had a fleet of planes that Vijay Mallya, who was the owner of Kingfisher Airlines, had bought. Ace quality. In fact, it was the best airplane that we had in those days. But they did have high fixed assets, but their working capital, it just got eroded with time and it got completely depleted. The reasons were the same, that there was a big rise in the oil price, and rupee had fallen down. So Kingfisher plane was facing a lot of liquidity crunch, and at the same time the government asked the banks to freeze their accounts. So basically they were left with no option than to close down their airlines. Now there is another thing that happened with Kingfisher. Now these planes are parked in Indira Gandhi International Airport in Delhi, and people who have seen those planes parked there have said that those planes have been cannibalized. Their spare parts, their electronic equipments have been taken away. Now what does Airport Authority of India has to say about all this? Wasn't it their responsibility to see to it that all those planes that are parked there are safe? Whatever happens to those planes later on, whatever court says, but then people who have gone inside and have taken the picture, they say that only skeletons remain. The skeleton of the aeroplane. Excuse me. Alright, so you can understand. Again, Kingfisher was a private airline. Similar things we've heard for years about Indian Airlines, which is a domestic state-owned airline. In 2012, am I right here? Yeah, when Congress was in power, they had announced 30,000 crore package. Now let me not even go into the figure because it varies, but this was a huge amount, and they were given a rescue package by the government in power those days. Next comes Indian Airlines, Air India, which flies internationally. In 2018, when Modi government had already come into power, the reason why I'm mentioning these parties is that it has nothing to do with the party in power. They all do the same thing. They announced 11,000 crore bailout package. So there you go. These facilities are not available to the private airlines, private enterprises. And where does this huge amount comes from? It comes from the taxes we give. We know that indirect tax, excise duty, and now GST is the biggest source of revenue for Indian government, followed by direct taxes and corporate taxes. So this is it. It's one big example. And then let's talk about telecom. In telecom, recently we've heard about how much problem these telecom companies, especially the private companies, are going through because they have to pay the adjusted gross revenue to the government, to DOT, Department of Telecom. Now that was because the spectrum charges, the license fee was so huge for these private companies that the government came up with the idea that they could instead pay a certain amount of their revenues to the government. Now, now after so many years, this thing was it was sub judice, and the verdict has come out that they just don't have to pay a certain amount of the revenue, but also that share would come from their dividends, from their interest. So this is a huge amount that these people are required to pay to the government. What they say is that Indian telecom services are cheapest in the world, and at the same time the spectrum charges and the licensing fee is the highest as compared to their global counterparts. So this is big problem with the private sector that the private sector is facing in the country. So now things as they stand, there were four companies that were required to pay this AGR, that is the adjusted gross revenue. It was Idea, Vodafone, Reliance Jio, and of course our government state-owned BSNL. Now what has happened recently, that after this verdict came out, BSNL and MTNL are merging. So they manipulate things according to their convenience. Both are government companies. MTNL operates in Mahanagar or the metros, but it is under huge losses because it pays its employees 90% more than the industry norms that the private telecom companies pay to their employees. Still such huge losses because they also give a lot of freebies, a lot of free connections and internet, free internet connections and telephone and cell phone facilities to the government employees. Other than that, there is mismanagement, so it's facing a lot of problem, and therefore they are merging. So we don't quite know will they pay the AGR or not. Each of these private companies, they have paid a certain amount of the adjusted gross revenue to the government, but so far the BSNL and MTNL have paid nothing. So you see what's happening. There is a lot of manipulation and finding ways to capture the market and oust the private companies, huge private companies, because with huge enterprises you have huge profit margins. You don't have so much presence of government enterprises at small level, at small scale or medium scale. So that they have left for the private units, and at the same time they haven't waived off the tax liabilities that they take regularly, consistently. So there are no laxity there in that department. Though it is said that if you want your small scale and medium scale industries to grow, give them some tax rebates, don't take tax from them in times of crisis, give moratoriums to them, make some adjustments, make waivers, so that they come to the point where break even is achieved. So even if you have a facade of giving private enterprises an equal footing, a level playing field, and you don't do that, make things simpler for the small scale units and medium scale units that are run by private individuals. Now, okay, aviation is done, telecom is done. Now let me talk about, there's one more example, and that's power sector. for private sector, power sector, it is not the center but the state that runs it, and they're driven by political objectives. We have states and union territories in our country where a huge part of electricity bill is waived off, is slashed, because for winning the voters. So that happens. That happens, and it is done by the state government. So mostly what happens, that generation of electricity and transmission is done by private companies, and its distribution is done by the government. And especially during corona times, the demand has come down, so people have not, and all those people who are paying are also not able to pay the complete amount, because they don't have any work. We know about the unemployment situation. So this is one reason. Other reason is for the distribution work which is run by the government, that there is a lot of mismanagement. There is a lot of free electricity, as I said, is given to people for winning votes, and also to the government officials. There's a lot of mismanagement, as a result of which the distribution company is not able to clear their debts to those private companies that are generating electricity and transmitting them. So this is the reason the power sector, in the private power sector as well, the private sector is what am I saying? So in the power sector, private sector is losing out, just like other places that are operating at large scale. And we've learned that about 8 to 9 power plants are going to be bought by NTPC, which is a government-run power company. So yet again, this happens. Right. Now let's talk about banks. Now banks is one stream. The banks is one industry that is given bailout packages all over the world, because they believe that since banks are regulated by the central bank, in our country by Reserve Bank, so people have certain faith restored in them, so they would like to bail out banks, even though that happens outside India. In India, it happens with all big companies, whether it is aviation or power or telecom, name it. They twist and turn the rules and regulations just to make their presence most prominent one. I'm talking about the state-owned companies, even though they are less efficient, huge loss making units, and they keep on giving those bailout packages out of the money they get from from the tax that we give to the government. So that's why, all right, I'll come to the conclusion later on. So in recent times, we've learned, in fact, it was day before yesterday, there was a news that there's going to be a bailout packages for the public sector banks. And all those private sector banks that are not performing well, they are not going to get any bailout packages. Instead, healthy public sector banks are going to overtake them. They are going to merge those banks into themselves. So there you go. Already a lot of money has been spent. I don't even want to say how much it is, but then it's a huge amount. You keep on reading this on internet. All right, so my conclusions, my takeaway from the whole thing was that there is, how do you expect your private sector to bloom, to give you the kind of returns that you expect? I'm talking about, when I say you, the government, when you don't give them any safety net, and your impression that you give that you want private sector to grow, become sustainable, falls flat, because you don't help them out in any way, any which way. You don't give them moratoriums, you don't give them tax holidays. The corporate tax is one of the highest in the world. The Even if they have genuine problem, there is genuine global economic crisis, still there is no rebate given to the private sector. And for the inefficiency that public sector has, they are given bailout packages, and that's because it seems, and they given him there is this whole air that PSUs and public nationalized banks and everything that is nationalized is more reliable. It is reliable because your and mine money is pumped into keeping them alive, not because they are the finest workers. Because obviously I just gave 4 examples, there's several of them. So why does government do this? I said earlier, because maybe they don't want presence of private sector where the profit margins are high, and they have stuffed their units, their firms, with so many employees, and there is so many of them who have zero productivity. Alright, so this is the reason why we don't see a lot of welfare taking place, welfare activities taking place in our country, because all the money that comes to them, the revenue that the government earns, goes for bailing out. Like for banks, since they have, most of them have their accounts in the public sector banks, they don't want them to close down. So it's hardly a time for bashing the government, because it does rise up to the occasion once in a while, but that's once in a while is a situation of pandemic. You don't want that thing to continue on and on. And there are people in the developed world who say that India is not capable. So we are capable. We know this. Our history, there are a lot of historical evidence backing up the fact that, be it medicine or in form of Ayurveda or spirituality or Atharvaved, which is perfect economy, and that time our country was known as the Golden Bird. Everything was perfect. Years of looting and invasion has brought things to such a bad condition, but even post independence there have been a lot of vested interest or things are not making sense when it comes to certain government actions. They don't seem to walk the talk. So this is pretty much it. Bye.